The morning dawned cold in Greenvale, a small district in rural Vermont. Julia, just 10 years old, tried to calm her 7-year-old brother Philip as they packed a small backpack with the little they had managed to gather before being expelled from home. Julia's hands trembled as she folded her brother's only warm sweater. Her eyes, brown and deep like her mother's, were welled up, but she struggled not to cry. "It's going to be okay, Philip. I promise," she whispered, adjusting the backpack on the little boy's back. The absence of Clara Olson, who had passed away after a long illness 3 months prior, had completely transformed the siblings' lives. Their father, Anthony, a truck driver who used to smile frequently, now drowned himself in bottles of hard liquor, unable to face the pain of loss. And Regina, the stepmother Clara never got to meet, was finally revealing her true nature. "I can't stand these children eating what they don't pay for anymore," Regina shouted from the kitchen, while Anthony, sitting on the torn sofa in the living room, just stared at the floor, the almost empty bottle in his trembling hands. "If you don't have the courage to fix this, I will. They have until dawn to get out of my house." Anthony looked up for a moment, as if wanting to protest, but the words died in his throat before they were even born. Alcohol and guilt had corroded his will, leaving only the shell of a man who had once been happy. The next morning, Regina locked the door and refused to open it, even when Philip cried from outside. The children waited for hours until hunger and despair forced them to accept the cruel reality. They no longer had a home. "She said we'd go to a shelter if we stayed here," Julia explained to her brother as they walked down the dirt road that cut through the village. "We'll find another place, Philip. A better place." On her wrist, Julia wore the only memento she had managed to save, a silver bracelet that had belonged to her mother. Clara had given it to her on the night she passed, whispering in a weak voice, "Keep this with you, my daughter. One day this bracelet will show you the way home." The girl didn't understand the meaning of those words, but she felt that the jewel was more than a simple ornament. It had a small pendant with the initials CO and BM delicately engraved. Julia used to ask her mother about the meaning of those letters, but Clara always changed the subject, her eyes gaining a melancholic sparkle that the girl preferred not to awaken. The sun was already beginning to set when the siblings arrived at an old wooden gate. A faded sign announced, "Hope Ranch." Philip, exhausted and with aching feet, sat by the side of the road. "I can't walk anymore." "Jew," he complained, rubbing his red eyes. Julia looked at the ranch. The main house was a few yards from the gate, an old but well-maintained building with walls yellowed by time and a wide porch. Some lights were already on, fighting the darkness that was beginning to dominate the landscape. "Let's ask for help," Julia decided, holding her brother's hand and gathering courage to knock on the gate. That's when a dog's bark cut through the silence, followed by hurried footsteps. An old man with white hair and skin wrinkled by the sun appeared, carrying a lantern. It was Old Man January, the ranch foreman, a solitary man who had dedicated his life to those lands. "Who's there at this hour?" he asked, raising the light to see better. Upon seeing the two children, his austere expression immediately softened. "My goodness, what are you doing here alone, children?" Julia, trying to maintain her composure, explained in a trembling voice, "We're looking for a place to spend the night, sir. Tomorrow we'll continue our journey." Old Man January noticed the despair in the girl's eyes and the exhaustion etched on the boy's face. In over 70 years of life, he had learned to recognize suffering. Come in," he invited, opening the gate. "It's not safe for children to be on the road at this hour. Mrs. Martha, the cook, must have something hot for you to eat." The ranch kitchen was cozy, with a wood-burning stove that spread warmth and the aroma of freshly prepared cassava soup. Mrs. Martha, a kind black woman with a generous smile, asked no questions. She simply served 2 steaming bowls and watched with tenderness as the children devoured the meal as if they hadn't eaten in days. "You can stay in the back room tonight," Old Man January said, exchanging knowing glances with Martha. "Tomorrow we'll talk better." That night, lying in the simple but clean bed in the staff room, Julia held the silver bracelet against her chest and allowed herself to cry silently so Philip wouldn't hear. She remembered the stories Clara used to tell about angels who protected lost children. Had her mother sent Old Man January to protect them? The next morning, while helping Mrs. Martha prepare breakfast, Julia felt the old foreman's eyes fixed on the bracelet on her wrist. He seemed intrigued, as if trying to retrieve a distant memory. "That bracelet," he began hesitantly. "Where did you get it, child?" "It was my mother's," Julia replied, instinctively holding the object with her other hand, as if fearing to lose it. "It was the last gift she gave me before she passed." Old Man January approached, adjusting his old spectacles. "May I see it closer?" Reluctantly, Julia extended her wrist. The old man examined the small pendant with the engraved initials, and his eyes widened in recognition. "C.O. and B.M., he murmured, more to himself than to those present. "Clara Olson and Bernard Mills." Julia's heart pounded. "Did you know my mother?" "No, my child," January replied, his voice filled with astonishment. "But I know Bernard Mills. He owned this ranch many years ago, before leaving for New York City and becoming one of the richest men in the country." Philip, who was playing in the corner of the kitchen with an old toy car Martha had given him, looked up upon hearing the conversation. "Who is Bernard Mills?" he asked, approaching his sister. Old Man January exchanged a meaningful look with Mrs. Martha before answering. There was something in that story that he still didn't fully understand, but his instinct told him that those children hadn't arrived at Hope Ranch by chance. "Bernard Mills is a man who built an empire," he explained, sitting heavily in the wooden chair. "He started here on this ranch working with his father. When old Mr. Mills passed away, Bernard sold almost everything and went to the city. Today he owns Mills Holdings, one of the largest construction companies in the United States." "And he knew our mother?" Julia insisted, feeling she was about to discover something important. "That, my child," January replied with a deep sigh, "is a story that perhaps only Bernard himself can tell." That same morning, while the children helped in the garden, Old Man January took an old cell phone from his pocket and made a call he hadn't imagined making in years. He had kept that number out of sentimentality, or perhaps loyalty to his old boss. Now that gesture could change the destiny of 2 abandoned children. "Hello?" A male voice answered on the other end of the line. "Mr. Bernard Mills?" The old foreman's voice trembled slightly. "This is January from Hope Ranch. You need to come here as soon as possible. I found something, or rather, someone you'll want to meet." Bernard Mills's office occupied the top floor of an imposing skyscraper in the financial heart of New York City. Through the wide glass windows, the metropolis stretched in all directions, a labyrinth of concrete and steel he had helped build over 2 decades. At 55, Bernard had achieved everything a man could desire: power, wealth, respect. Everything except peace. That afternoon, as he reviewed contracts for a new development on the Long Island coast, his cell phone rang. The name on the screen surprised him: January. It had been almost 15 years since he last spoke with the old foreman of Hope Ranch, a property he kept more out of nostalgia than commercial interest. The conversation was brief, but enough to awaken ghosts Bernard thought were buried. One name in particular, Clara Olson, echoed in his mind like the distant ringing of a bell. His hands trembled slightly as he hung up the phone. "Cancel my appointments for the next few days," he instructed his secretary without further explanation. "I'm going to Vermont." At the building's helipad, Bernard boarded his private helicopter. As they flew over the city towards rural Vermont, he allowed himself a rare trip down memory lane. Clara Olson. How could it be that, after so many years, that name would return to his life? They had met when Bernard was still an idealistic young man, working on his father's land. Clara was the daughter of a rural schoolteacher, a simple girl but of extraordinary intelligence. Love blossomed quickly, intense as only first love can be. For almost 2 years, they lived a romance that seemed destined to last forever. He had given her a silver bracelet, on which he had had both their initials engraved, a symbol of the promise of a life together. But then, the opportunity arose, an internship at a construction company in New York City, the first step towards realizing Bernard's dreams. Clara had insisted he accept, even if it meant being temporarily separated. "It's only a year, Bernard," she had said. "Then we'll be together again." What was meant to be temporary became permanent. One promotion led to another, and soon Bernard found himself consumed by ambition. Letters to Clara became less frequent, visits rare, until in a decision he now recognized as the biggest mistake of his life, he ended the relationship over the phone. "I can no longer live between 2 worlds, Clara," he had said with a coldness he didn't recognize in himself. Our paths are different now. He never saw her again. Remorse consumed him for months, but professional success served as an anesthetic. Eventually he convinced himself that he had made the right choice, that love was merely a luxury ambitious men could not afford. And now, 22 years later, the past was knocking at his door. The helicopter landed in the open field near the headquarters of Hope Ranch late in the afternoon. January was waiting for him at the main gate, his aged face even more marked by worry. "Thank you for coming, boss," the old man said, using the address from years ago. "The children are in the house." "What's this story, January? Who are these children? And what do they have to do with Clara?" "It's better if you see for yourself," the foreman replied, guiding Bernard along the stone path. On the porch of the main house, Julia and Philip curiously watched the arrival of the stranger in an elegant suit, who seemed out of place in that rural setting. Mrs. Martha had prepared them for the visit, asking them to be clean and well-dressed without explaining exactly why. "Is that the rich man?" Philip whispered to his sister. "I think so," Julia replied, nervously adjusting the bracelet on her wrist. When Bernard approached and saw the children, his heart skipped a beat. The girl, those eyes. He felt momentarily dizzy, as if past and present violently collided before him. "Mr. Mills, these are Julia and Philip," January introduced. "They arrived at the ranch yesterday after difficult circumstances." Bernard barely heard. His gaze was fixed on the bracelet on the girl's wrist, the same one he had given Clara over 2 decades ago. Suddenly, reality hit him hard. The girl's age, the features that so resembled Clara, the bracelet. Everything pointed to a conclusion he could barely process. "How old are you?" he asked the girl, his voice trembling. 10 years old, sir," Julia replied, feeling intimidated by the intensity of the stranger's gaze. "And your mother?" "What was her name?" "Clara Olson," the girl replied, and her words fell like a weight on Bernard. January noticed the pallor that had taken over his old boss's face and intervened. "Children, why don't you go help Mrs. Martha with a snack? Mr. Mills and I need to talk." When they were alone, Bernard collapsed into a chair on the porch, running his hands over his face. "This isn't possible, January. Clara and we broke up over 20 years ago. From what I understand, sir, Clara married a man named Anthony a few years later, the boy's father. But the girl... Well, the age matches, doesn't it?" Bernard felt a mix of emotions he hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of having a daughter with Clara, had never crossed his mind. How could she have hidden this from him all these years? "Where is Clara now? I need to talk to her." The old foreman lowered his eyes, carefully choosing his words. "Sir, Clara passed away 3 months ago. A long illness, from what the children said. Their father sank into drinking after that, and the stepmother kicked them out of the house. They walked for hours until they got here. Passed away." The word hit Bernard like a physical blow. Clara, his Clara, was gone forever, taking with her answers he would never get. "Why did she never tell me?" he murmured, more to himself than to January. "Why let our daughter grow up without knowing me?" "Perhaps she tried, sir," the foreman replied gently. "Sometimes letters get lost or people change and no longer want to be found." January's words contained a veiled criticism that did not escape Bernard. Indeed, after moving to New York City, he had cut all ties with his past, changed phone numbers, rejected correspondence from Greenvale. He was determined to reinvent himself as a big city man, without roots to pull him back. That night, Bernard stayed at the ranch, settling into the old room that had been his parents'. He couldn't sleep. He got up and walked to the porch, observing the stars that were invisible in New York City due to light pollution. That's when he noticed a small figure sitting on the garden swing. Julia also couldn't sleep and was gently swaying under the moonlight. Hesitantly, Bernard approached. "May I sit with you?" The girl nodded, watching him curiously. "Did you know my mother?" she asked directly, surprising Bernard with her perceptiveness. "Yes, I did," he admitted, feeling vulnerable before that child. "A long time ago. She used to say that this bracelet held a love story that one day I would understand," Julia said, touching the silver object. "The initials are yours, aren't they?" "BM, Bernard Mills." Bernard felt a knot in his throat. Even in her last moments, Clara had preserved the memory of the love they shared without resentment. "Julia," he began, choosing his words carefully, "there are things I need to find out, questions I need to answer. But in the meantime, I would like to help you and your brother. You can stay here at the ranch for as long as necessary." The girl studied him with Clara's same perceptive eyes, eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances, into the soul. "Do you think my mother would be happy about this?" she asked. The question, so simple and direct, caught Bernard off guard. Would Clara be able to forgive him for the abandonment? Would she accept him now taking a role in her children's lives, especially Julia's? "I hope so," he answered honestly. "I truly hope so." That night, under the starry Vermont sky, something changed in Bernard Mills. A door he had kept locked for decades slowly began to open, allowing long-repressed feelings to surface. And for the first time in years, he felt tears stream down his face. Tears for lost love, for wasted time, and for a daughter he was only just beginning to know. Bernard's first week at Hope Ranch turned into 2, then a month. Daily calls to New York City kept his businesses running remotely, while he delved deeper into investigating Clara's past and living with the children. One Sunday afternoon, as Philip ran through the orchard chasing butterflies, Bernard and Julia walked side by side on the property. The girl, initially shy with the businessman, was gradually opening up. "My mother kept your letters in a small wooden box," she revealed, breaking a comfortable silence. "Sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she would reread them and cry." The information caught Bernard by surprise. He had imagined Clara would have thrown away any memory of him after the breakup. Did you ever read any of those letters?" he asked hesitantly. Julia shook her head. "Mommy said they were memories that only made sense to her. After she passed, stepmother Regina found the box and burned it along with other things of Mommy's." The cruelty of that act made Bernard unconsciously clench his fists. The idea that tangible evidence of his love for Clara had been destroyed out of pure malice infuriated him. But there was another, much more urgent question he could no longer postpone. "Julia," he began, carefully choosing his words, "there's something important I need to ask you. Your mother. Did she ever talk about who your biological father was?" The girl stopped walking, her eyes fixed on a distant point on the horizon. "She said my father was a man who dreamed of skyscrapers, but who got lost among them," Julia replied, clearly quoting memorized words. "She said one day when I was older, she would tell me the whole story." "And Anthony? How did he treat you?" "He was kind at first," Julia said with surprising maturity for her 10 years. "But after Mommy got sick, he changed. He started drinking a lot. Sometimes he would look at me as if I were a stranger." The pieces began to fit. Bernard suspected that Anthony knew Julia was not his biological daughter, and that this had contributed to his emotional distance, exacerbated by the loss of his wife and alcoholism. "What would happen if you found out your real father is closer than you imagine?" Bernard asked, feeling his heart quicken. Julia stared at him, her scrutinizing eyes identical to Clara's. "You're my father, aren't you?" she asked directly, without beating around the bush. "That's why you're here. That's why the bracelet has your initials along with my mother's." The girl's frankness left Bernard momentarily speechless. He expected to have to explain delicately, to prepare the ground for a gradual revelation. But Julia, with the keen intuition she had inherited from Clara, had already connected the dots on her own. "I believe so," he finally replied, sitting on a fallen log to be at her height. "But I need to be sure. Would you allow us to do a test to confirm?" "What kind of test?" "A DNA test. It's simple, just a saliva sample." The girl thought for a moment, then nodded. "And if it's true, what happens next?" It was a fair question, and Bernard knew the answer would define the future of everyone involved. "If it's true, I'd like to be a part of your life, Julia. Yours and Philip's. You would never have to worry about anything again. You would have a home, an education, everything I can offer." "Philip isn't your son," the girl reminded him. "But he's your brother," Bernard replied without hesitation. "And that's what matters." That same afternoon, Bernard made a few calls. Their private laboratory would send a nurse to the ranch the next day to collect samples, and the results would be available in a week. While they waited, Bernard continued his investigation into the past. With January's help, he located the old house where Clara had lived with her children and Anthony, a simple building on the outskirts of Greenvale. now abandoned after the children's expulsion. With a judicial authorization obtained through his lawyers, Bernard gained access to the property. The state of the house reflected the chaos of the life Clara had led in her last years: peeling walls, broken furniture, traces of a poverty that contrasted brutally with the luxurious life he led in New York City. In what had been Clara's room, he found a stuck drawer that the stepmother had not been able to open. Inside, a yellowed envelope addressed to him but never sent. With trembling hands, Bernard opened the letter dated 11 years ago. Dear Bernard, this is the 10th letter I've written since I found out I was pregnant with your daughter. None of the previous ones were sent, and this one will probably also remain with me. Not out of pride, but believing that silence may be kinder than the truth. Our daughter was born yesterday, as beautiful as the dawn. I named her Julia, a name you once mentioned you would give your firstborn. Her eyes are mine, but her smile, even though she's just a baby, reminds me so much of yours. I often considered telling you about her, but time passed. You became this important man I see in business magazines, with your perfect and organized life. What right do I have to mess up this world you built with such effort? If one day destiny brings Julia to you, I hope you can love her without resentment for my silence. I didn't deprive her of you out of revenge, but believing it was better that way. Perhaps I am wrong. Perhaps love is always the right path, even when it hurts. With affection, Clara. Bernard let himself fall to the dusty floor, the letter clutched to his chest, tears streaming freely down his face. Clara hadn't hated him, as he had imagined for so many years. She had protected him in her own way, sacrificing her own happiness not to disturb the life he had chosen. At the end of that week, the DNA test result arrived, confirming what they already knew in their hearts. Bernard was Julia's biological father. Now it was official, indisputable, a truth no one could question. Sitting on the porch with the children, he shared the news. Philip, still confused by the situation, asked the question that most worried Bernard. Does this mean you're taking Julia away? That we're going to be separated? No, Philip, Bernard assured, holding the boy's hand. It means I gained not only a daughter, but also a son by heart. You two are a complete package, and you will remain so. The smile that lit up the little boy's face was worth more than all the millionaire contracts Bernard had ever signed in his life. That night, after the children fell asleep, Bernard called January for a conversation in the main house's library. The old foreman had become his confidant and advisor in recent times, his simple wisdom offering clarity in moments of doubt. What do you intend to do now, boss? January asked, accepting the cup of coffee offered to him. I will assume guardianship of the children, Bernard replied with determination. I cannot undo the past, but I can build a future for them, a future Clara would have wanted them to have. And what about Anthony? As far as I know, he is still Julia's legal father and Philip's biological father. The issue was thorny. Despite having abandoned the children to fend for themselves, Anthony still held legal guardianship of the children. Any attempt by Bernard to assume that responsibility could turn into a complicated legal battle. I don't want to snatch anyone's children, January, but I also cannot ignore the suffering they have endured. I will try a peaceful approach first. If Anthony truly cares about the children, he should want what's best for them. And the best would be for them to stay with you? The foreman questioned, not as a challenge but as a genuine question. Bernard reflected seriously. I can offer material comfort, quality education, opportunities. But I know that's not everything. Children need love, attention, presence. I have a lot to learn about being a father, January. The old man smiled, satisfied with the honesty of the answer. You've already started learning, just by recognizing that. The next day, Bernard made a decision that surprised his associates in New York City. He requested a 6-month leave of absence from the presidency of Mills Holdings. For the first time in over 20 years, he was putting his personal life ahead of business. I have family matters to resolve, he explained to the board of directors in a video conference. Matters that can no longer wait. While Bernard reorganized his life to accommodate the children on the other side of Greenvale, information reached Regina's ears. The children she had expelled were now under the protection of one of the richest men in the country. Her eyes gleamed with the possibility of taking advantage of the situation. It was time to convince Anthony to claim the children back. Autumn in Vermont colored the mountains with shades of ochre and red, transforming the landscape around Hope Ranch. For the children, the 2 months living with Bernard had been a sequence of discoveries and healing. Philip, once withdrawn and frightened, now ran freely through the fields, built tree houses, and learned about nature with Old Man January. Julia, more reserved, found refuge in the house library, where she spent hours discovering worlds in old books. For Bernard, each day represented a lesson in the parenthood he had never exercised. Accustomed to business meetings and corporate decisions, he now faced much more complex questions. How to explain to a 10-year-old girl why the sky is blue? How to comfort a 7-year-old boy after a nightmare? How to balance affection and discipline? I thought it would be easier to manage a company than to take care of 2 children, he confessed to January one morning, as he watched Philip try to fly a kite they had built together. Companies don't need love, boss, the old man replied, smiling. Only competence. Children need both. That particular morning marked a special date. It was Julia's birthday. Bernard had planned a small celebration, nothing extravagant, respecting the still recent mourning for their mother. Mrs. Martha was preparing a chocolate cake, the girl's favorite, while farm workers set up a table under the orchard trees. Are you sure she'll like the surprise? Bernard asked Philip, as he helped the boy color a birthday card for his sister. Julia loves surprises, Philip assured, concentrating on his drawing. Mommy always made surprises for her birthday, even when we had little money. The mention of Clara brought a momentary silence. Bernard still felt a pang of pain whenever her name was mentioned, a mixture of guilt and longing that time had not completely healed. What were those surprises like? He asked gently, wanting to keep the mother's memory alive for the children. Philip smiled, recalling, once Mommy saved for months to buy a book Julia wanted. Another time she decorated the whole house with paper flowers she made herself. And always there was a piece of sky. A piece of sky. That's what she called sunflowers, the boy explained. She said they were pieces of the sky that fell to earth. Julia loves sunflowers. Bernard looked at his watch. He still had a few hours until the party. He made a quick call and, in less than 2 hours, a truck delivered dozens of pots of sunflowers to the ranch, enough to create a small golden field in the garden. When Julia returned from her walk with January, she stood paralyzed at the entrance to the property. The path to the house was lined with sunflowers, and a small table set in the shade of the trees awaited her, decorated with ribbons and a cake with her name. Happy birthday, Bernard said, apprehensive about his daughter's reaction. Julia's eyes filled with tears, but there was a smile on her lips. She ran to Bernard and for the first time hugged him spontaneously. Thank you, she whispered. Mommy would be happy. That moment marked a new phase in the relationship between father and daughter. The ice that still existed between them began to melt, giving way to a trust that grew with each passing day. After the small celebration, while the children played with some simple presents Bernard had bought, he retreated to the office. There was an important bureaucratic matter to resolve, the formal adoption process for Philip and the legal recognition of Julia's paternity. His lawyers in New York City had sent the necessary documentation, but warned that the situation could become complicated. Anthony was still the legal father of both children, and his whereabouts were unknown since the stepmother had expelled them from home. We need to locate the biological father, the lawyer explained via video call. Without his formal renunciation of guardianship, the process could drag on for years. Bernard sighed. He feared that a search for Anthony could bring more problems than solutions. What if he, moved by resentment or influenced by the stepmother, decided to fight for custody of the children? Continue with the process, Bernard instructed. Meanwhile, I'll try to find out where Anthony is. With January's help, who knew everyone in the region, it wasn't difficult to track the man's whereabouts. Anthony now worked as an assistant in a mechanic's workshop in the neighboring town, still battling alcoholism, living in a rented room at the back of the workshop itself. Regina had left him when she realized there was nothing more to financially exploit in the relationship. The information brought relief to Bernard. With Regina out of the picture, it might be easier to reach an amicable agreement with Anthony. He decided to visit him personally, without lawyers or formalities that could intimidate the man. The next morning, he drove to the small workshop. He found Anthony working under an old car, his fingers stained with grease, his face marked by suffering and addiction. "Anthony Hayes?" Bernard asked, maintaining a respectful distance. The man slid out from under the vehicle, wiping his hands on a grimy cloth. Upon recognizing the well-dressed visitor, his eyes widened. "You're the man from the ranch," he said, his voice hoarse. "The man who has my children." "Bernard Mills," he introduced himself, extending his hand. After a moment of hesitation, Anthony shook it. "Can we talk in private?" They found a small bar near the workshop, practically empty at that hour of the morning. Anthony ordered a coffee, refusing the offer of alcohol, a small sign that he was trying to change. "How are the children?" he asked after an uncomfortable silence. "They're fine," Bernard replied, observing the genuine concern on the man's face. "Philip is learning to swim. Julia reads every book she finds." A fragile smile appeared on Anthony's tired face. She was always like that, smart, like her mother. The mention of Clara created an unexpected connection between the two men. Both had loved the same woman in different ways, and now shared responsibility for her children. "Anthony," Bernard began, getting straight to the point, "I came to talk about the children's legal guardianship." The man lowered his eyes, shame evident in his posture. "I know I failed them," he admitted, his voice choked. "After Clara passed, I got lost. Regina manipulated me, made me believe we couldn't raise the children without their mother. When I realized what had happened, they were already with you." "Why didn't you look for them?" Bernard questioned, genuinely curious. "What kind of father would I be, showing up drunk and having nothing to offer?" Anthony shook his head. "Besides, I know about you and Clara. I know Julia is your biological daughter." The revelation surprised Bernard. "Clara told you?" "She didn't have to, I always knew. Her eyes are yours, but there's something in the way she looks at the world. It's you, in every gesture." Anthony paused, sipping his coffee. "I didn't mind. I loved Julia as my own from day one, but I always knew she carried another blood." Anthony's honesty moved Bernard. He expected to find resistance, perhaps even hostility. Instead, he found a broken man who showed genuine love for the children. "What do you propose?" Anthony finally asked. "I want legal guardianship of both," Bernard replied frankly. "I can offer them education, comfort, security, things they deserve to have." Anthony nodded slowly. "And me? Would I never see them again?" "That's not what I'm proposing," Bernard clarified. "You would continue to be a part of their lives. Regular visits, participation in important decisions. It would be a shared agreement, not a definitive separation." Anthony's eyes filled with suppressed tears. "You know Regina can come back at any moment, don't you? When she finds out there's money involved, she'll try to take advantage." "We are prepared for that," Bernard assured. "My lawyers have documented the abandonment of the children. She has no legal chance." Anthony seemed to reflect for a long moment. "I want to see them before making any decision," he finally said. "I want to be sure they are happy." Bernard hesitated. He feared that a reunion could confuse the children, especially Philip, who still asked about his father frequently. On the other hand, he couldn't deny that right to Anthony, who, despite his flaws, showed genuine concern. "Tomorrow," Bernard agreed. "You can visit them at the ranch, but I need to prepare them first." When he returned to Hope Ranch, Bernard found the children helping Mrs. Martha plant vegetable seedlings in the garden. The domestic and peaceful scene contrasted with the tension he felt thinking about the next day's encounter. After dinner, while Philip was already asleep, Bernard called Julia to talk on the porch. The full moon illuminated the fields, creating elongated shadows on the sunflowers that now grew in a special flower bed planted after the birthday party. "I found your father today," Bernard said, carefully observing his daughter's reaction. "Anthony." Julia immediately tensed, her fingers tightening on the silver bracelet she never took off her wrist. "Does he want to take us back?" she asked, fear evident in her voice. "No, it's not that," Bernard quickly clarified. "He just wants to visit you tomorrow, see how you are." The girl remained silent, processing the information. "Are you afraid to see him?" Bernard asked softly. "I don't know," Julia replied honestly. Before Mummy passed, he was good to us. After, it was as if he had also left, even though he was there. Bernard nodded, understanding. Grief could transform people, and not everyone could face it with strength. People make mistakes, Julia. Some bigger than others. Your father, Anthony. He lost his way when your mother passed, but that doesn't mean he doesn't love you. And Regina, the girl asked, apprehension returning to her voice. Is she coming too? No. They're no longer together. A sigh of relief escaped the girl's lips. Philip will be happy to see Dad, Julia commented, always concerned about her brother's well-being. He misses him a lot. His daughter's maturity and generosity moved Bernard. Despite everything she had been through, she could still think of others' happiness. And you, daughter, how do you feel about all this? It was the first time Bernard had called her daughter so directly, and the term created a wave of emotion in both of them. I just want everyone to stop fighting, Julia replied, with wisdom that surpassed her age. Mommy always said that true love has no jealousy or disputes. Bernard smiled, recognizing Clara's philosophy in his daughter's words. Even physically absent, she continued to guide those children with her love and wisdom. I'll do my best to make it so, he promised, hugging Julia tenderly. That night, before going to sleep, Bernard reread Clara's letter found in the old house. One phrase in particular echoed in his mind. I didn't deprive her of you out of revenge, but believing it was better that way. Perhaps I am wrong. Perhaps love is always the right path, even when it hurts. Clara was right. Love was always the way, no matter how difficult and painful. And out of love for the children, he would find a way to peacefully coexist with Anthony, so that Julia and Philip could have the family they deserved, even if it wasn't conventional. The next morning, as he watched the sun rise over the fields of Hope Ranch, Bernard felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. Regardless of what happened at the meeting with Anthony, he was determined to be the father he had never been, present, loving, committed to his children's happiness. And perhaps through that commitment, he could finally find forgiveness, not only from Clara but also from himself. The sun had not yet reached its highest point when Anthony's car parked in front of Hope Ranch. Bernard awaited him on the porch, trying to control the anxiety the encounter provoked. The children were in the back garden, advised of the visit, but still unaware of the exact moment their father would arrive. To Bernard's surprise, Anthony was not alone. In the passenger seat was Regina, her blonde dyed hair and long red painted, nails contrasting with the bucolic atmosphere of the ranch. Her calculating smile betrayed her true intentions. I thought you would come separately, Bernard commented, without extending his hand to Regina when they approached. She insisted on accompanying me, Anthony explained, visibly uncomfortable. She said she misses the children too. Bernard's experienced eyes, accustomed to identifying falsehoods in business negotiations, clearly saw the woman's game. Regina was not there out of affection, but out of financial interest. She had probably discovered his fortune and saw an opportunity for extortion. The children are in the garden, Bernard informed dryly. Let's go to them. On the way through the house, Regina made no secret of her dazzlement with the property's discreet luxury. Her eyes evaluated every piece of furniture, every object, as if mentally calculating how much they might be worth. Nice place, she commented with feigned casualness. Must have cost a fortune. Bernard ignored the comment, guiding them to the garden where Julia and Philip played under Mrs. Martha's watchful supervision. Upon seeing his father, Philip immediately dropped the toy car he was playing with and ran towards him. "Dad!" he shouted, throwing himself into Anthony's arms. The man hugged his son tightly, tears streaming freely down his face. The emotion was genuine, and for a moment Bernard felt a pang of jealousy, a feeling he immediately suppressed, recognizing it as petty. Julia remained where she was, observing the scene cautiously, her eyes fixed on Regina, and a slight tremor ran through her body. Noticing his daughter's discomfort, Bernard approached and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm here." Encouraged by her biological father's presence, Julia finally approached Anthony, who had already put Philip down. The man looked at her with a mixture of emotions, guilt, affection, regret. "Julia," he said, his voice choked. "You're so beautiful and grown up." The girl allowed a brief hug but maintained an emotional distance that everyone noticed. "Hello, Tony," she replied formally, using the nickname she had adopted for her stepfather in recent years, marking a subtle separation between him and the paternal figure. Regina stepped forward, opening her arms in a theatrical gesture. "My darlings, how I missed you!" she exclaimed, trying to hug the children. Philip instinctively dodged, while Julia took a step back, moving closer to Bernard. The children's evident disdain did not go unnoticed, creating a moment of embarrassment that Mrs. Martha, with her practical wisdom, tried to alleviate. "Lunch is almost ready," the housekeeper announced. "Why don't we talk at the table? I made that chicken and rice stew the children love." During the meal served on the porch overlooking the fields, the tension remained palpable. Regina tried at all costs to create an image of an affectionate stepmother offering food to Philip, asking about Julia's classes, as if she had never kicked them out of the house. "We're thinking of taking the children out next weekend," Regina suddenly announced, looking directly at Bernard. "Maybe even to the city. There's that new amusement park that opened." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Julia interrupted, surprising everyone with her firmness. "You kicked us out of the house. You said you couldn't stand us anymore." The silence that followed was heavy. Regina paled, while Anthony stared at his own plate, unable to defend his ex-partner from that truthful accusation. "Julia, dear, you misunderstood," Regina tried, forcing a smile. "It was just a misunderstanding. I was nervous that day and—" "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Philip intervened, finding courage in his sister's example. "You locked the door and said if we didn't leave, you'd call the police." Bernard watched the scene unfold with a mixture of pride and concern. Pride for his children's courage in confronting their truths, concern for the emotional effects that confrontation could cause. "I think the children need a break," Bernard said, standing up. "Mrs. Martha, could you take Julia and Philip for that ice cream we made yesterday?" Understanding the cue, the housekeeper promptly guided the children into the house, leaving the three adults alone on the porch. As soon as they were alone, Regina dropped the friendly facade. "How much?" she asked Bernard directly, her voice acquiring a calculating tone. "How much is it worth to you to keep these children?" Anthony looked up, horrified by his ex-partner's audacity. "Regina, what do you think you're doing?" "Being practical," she replied, without taking her eyes off Bernard. "This man wants the children. We have legal guardianship. It's a simple business." Bernard remained impassive, although inwardly he felt a growing fury. In his years of business, he had met many opportunists, but few as brazen as Regina. "There's no money involved in this matter," he replied coldly. "We are talking about the well-being of two children, not a commercial transaction." Regina laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Don't play the saint, you're a businessman, everything has a price." "Regina, enough," Anthony shouted, banging on the table. "That's not why we came here." The outburst of the normally passive Anthony surprised both Regina and Bernard. The man trembled, years of submission and frustration finally finding an outlet. "I came to see my children," Anthony continued, staring at Regina, "to make sure they're well, that they're happy, not to sell them like merchandise." Regina narrowed her eyes, quickly calculating her next move. "Don't be an idiot, Anthony. You know very well we can't afford to raise them. This man has millions. Why not take advantage of the situation?" "Because they're my children, not objects," Anthony retorted, standing up, "and I'm tired of letting you treat them like that." Bernard watched the confrontation, realizing he had judged Anthony incorrectly. Beneath the defeated appearance and addiction, there was a father who genuinely loved his children, just too weak to protect them until that moment. "You weakling!" Regina spat, also standing up. "You've always been a failure. That's why Clara left you that bastard to raise." The insult to Julia was the last straw. Anthony, in a gesture that surprised even himself, grabbed Regina's wrist when she tried to slap him. "Never again," he said with an unsettling calm, "speak of my daughter like that." "Yes, my daughter, because children belong to those who raise them, not just those who father them." I loved Julia from the first day, even knowing she wasn't my blood. Regina recoiled, rubbing her wrist, hatred evident in her gaze. You'll regret this, she threatened. I'll sue both of you. For assault, for parental alienation, for everything. I can invent. Go ahead, Bernard replied calmly, taking his cell phone from his pocket. But first listen to this. He pressed the play button and Regina's voice filled the room. How much is it worth to you to keep these children? It's a simple business. Regina's eyes widened in shock. You recorded me? That's illegal. Actually, it's not, Bernard corrected. We are in an open environment, in a conversation I am participating in, perfectly legal, and I'm sure a judge will be very interested to hear how you tried to sell the guardianship of 2 children. Regina paled, realizing her strategy had failed spectacularly. This isn't over, she threatened, grabbing her purse. Let's go, Anthony. To her surprise, the man didn't move. No, Regina, it's over. Between us and between you and the children. Anthony's sudden determination left Regina momentarily speechless. Accustomed to manipulating him easily, she hadn't expected such resistance. You'll regret it, she repeated, before storming off towards the car. The 2 men remained on the porch, watching Regina leave alone, kicking up dust on the dirt road. A heavy silence settled, finally broken by Anthony. I apologize, he said, running his hands over his tired face. I didn't know she planned this. I believe you, Bernard replied, perceiving the other's sincerity, and I respect what you did just now. It couldn't have been easy to confront her after so long under her influence. Anthony nodded, a solitary tear tracing a path down his marked face. I'm not a strong man, Bernard. The drinking, the depression after losing Clara. I became a shadow of what I was. But I love those children more than anything in this world. Bernard felt an unexpected empathy for the man in front of him. Both had loved Clara, both had made mistakes, both were trying in their own way to do what was right for her children. What do you intend to do now? Bernard asked. Anthony took a deep breath, seeming to seriously ponder his future for the first time in a long time. I've been attending a support group for 3 weeks, he revealed. I haven't had a drink in 17 days. It's not much, I know, but it's a start. It's an excellent start, Bernard encouraged. As for guardianship, Anthony continued, I'll be honest. I'm not in a position to raise 2 children right now. I don't have financial stability or emotional stability. They deserve more than I can offer. And what do you suggest? That you assume legal guardianship of both, Anthony replied after a moment of reflection. You can give them what I cannot. Education, comfort, security. But I want to be able to see them, to be a part of their lives, not as a stranger who appears occasionally, but as someone constant. Bernard extended his hand, which Anthony shook firmly. It's a fair solution, he agreed. We can establish a formal agreement with regular visits and participation in important decisions about the children. A weight seemed to have been removed from Anthony's shoulders. Shall we tell them? He asked, referring to the children. I think they have the right to know, Bernard agreed. And to have a say too. It's their lives we're deciding after all. When Julia and Philip returned with Mrs. Martha, they found the 2 men conversing amicably on the porch. Regina's absence and the lighter atmosphere did not go unnoticed by the children. Where's Regina? Philip asked, looking around with apprehension. She's gone, Anthony replied simply. And she won't bother you anymore. Julia studied the faces of the 2 adults, trying to decipher what had happened. Did you fight? She asked directly. No, my daughter, Bernard replied. On the contrary. We reached an agreement, but we want to know what you think about it. Sitting together under the shade of the mango trees, the 4 talked openly about the future. Bernard and Anthony explained, in terms the children could understand, the arrangement they had discussed. So we're going to live here with Uncle Bernard, but you'll visit us? Philip summarized, looking at his father. Yes, son, and when I'm better, maybe you can spend some weekends with me too. Julia remained thoughtful, processing everything that had been said. You're not abandoning us again? She finally asked Anthony, her voice laden with contained emotions. The man knelt before her, his eyes level with the girl's. Never again, Julia. I've made many mistakes, but I'm trying to fix them. I can't go back in time, but I can do better from now on. Would you give me that chance?" After a long moment of consideration, Julia nodded, allowing herself to be embraced by Anthony. Observing the scene, Bernard felt a strange mixture of emotions. Jealousy, yes, but also relief and even gratitude. The children deserved all the love they could receive from all possible sources. It wasn't a competition, but a collaboration for the well-being of those little beings whom Clara had left as her most precious. Legacy. That night, after Anthony left with a promise to return the following weekend, Bernard took the children for a walk through the sunflower field that was now in full bloom. Under the starry Vermont sky, sitting among the tall golden flowers, they talked about Clara, about memories and about the future they would build together. "Mommy would be happy," Julia suddenly said, holding the silver bracelet against the moonlight. "She always said that family is who loves us. No matter the blood." "Your mother was a very wise woman," Bernard replied, his voice choked with emotion. "And now we have a bigger family," Philip added, his childlike logic finding beauty in the complex situation. "We have you, we have Dad, we have Old Man January and Mrs. Martha." Bernard hugged them both, feeling profound gratitude for the second chance life had granted him. He couldn't go back in time and correct his mistakes with Clara, but he could honor her memory by loving the children she had left behind, one of them, his own blood. The other, united by equally strong bonds of affection and commitment. "Tomorrow," Bernard said, "we will go to the Greenvale courthouse. We will begin the process to formalize our family." In the sky, a shooting star cut through the darkness, and the three made a silent wish, each in their own way. For the future they were beginning to build together. The Greenvale courthouse was a simple two-story building, painted faded yellow, with a small square in front where children played under the watchful eyes of mothers and grandmothers. That Tuesday morning, an unusual movement drew the attention of local residents. The black limousine parked at the entrance, the men in suits who seemed out of place in the quiet rural setting, and above all the presence of Bernard Mills, whose figure was known through business magazines and newspapers. Inside the juvenile and family courtroom, Judge Matthew Reed, a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses, carefully examined the presented documents. On one side of the room, Bernard and his lawyers, on the other Anthony alone, but with a determination in his gaze he had not shown months before. "This is an unusual case," the judge commented, flipping through the file. "It's not every day we see such an amicable agreement on custody matters, especially under such peculiar circumstances." The children waited outside under Mrs. Martha's care. Bernard had insisted they be spared the legal proceedings, although Julia had protested, arguing that she was old enough to participate in decisions about her own future. "Your Honor," Bernard's lawyer began, "Mr. Mills requests legal guardianship of both children based on two main factors. First, the recognition of Julia Olson's biological paternity, proven by the DNA test attached to the records. Second, Mr. Anthony Hayes's willingness to relinquish guardianship of minor Philip, recognizing that Mr. Mills can provide better living conditions, education and development." The judge nodded, turning to Anthony. "Mr. Hayes, are you aware that you are giving up legal guardianship of your biological son and the guardianship you exercised over Julia Olson, even though you are not her biological father?" Anthony stood up, his hands slightly trembling but his voice firm. "I am, Your Honor, but it's not exactly giving up. I prefer to think I'm doing what's best for them right now. The agreement provides for regular visits and participation in important decisions regarding the children's education and health." The judge seemed to appreciate the man's honesty. "And what about Ms. Regina Matos?" the magistrate asked. "It is stated in the records that she lived with you and the children, acting as a stepmother." A tense silence settled. It was Bernard who responded, with the gravity of someone weighing every word. "Your Honor, Ms. Matos expelled the children from the residence, according to sworn statements attached to the case. Furthermore, there are recordings that prove her attempt to financially negotiate the children's guardianship." The judge frowned, flipping through to find the mentioned reports. "I also see that a police report was filed at the time," he observed, adjusting his glasses. "The children were found walking alone on the road, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor. Bernard confirmed. "That's when they arrived at Hope Ranch, a property I maintain in the region." After a few more questions and clarifications, the judge requested a recess to deliberate. When he returned, he brought with him a social worker who had interviewed the children weeks earlier. "Dr. Mills, Mr. Hayes," the judge began, after analyzing all the documentation, hearing the social worker's technical opinion, and considering the best interests of the children, "I decide to grant definitive guardianship of Julia Olson Mills and Philip Olson Hayes to Mr. Bernard Mills." Bernard felt immense relief course through his body. Months of anxiety and legal uncertainty finally came to an end. "As for the proposed visitation agreement," the magistrate continued, "I consider it appropriate and beneficial for the children, who thus maintain their bond with the paternal figure they have known for years. Mr. Anthony Hayes will have the right to bi-weekly visits, with the possibility of review in 6 months, depending on the evolution of his treatment for alcohol dependence." Anthony nodded, visibly emotional. "Let the necessary documents be issued," the judge concluded, striking the gavel. Case closed. In the hallway, Julia and Philip eagerly awaited the result. Upon seeing Bernard and Anthony leaving the room together, with serene expressions they ran towards them. "So?" Julia asked, holding Philip's hand. "Everything's resolved, daughter," Bernard replied, kneeling to be at the children's height. "You're officially going to live with me at the ranch now." "And Dad?" Philip asked, looking at Anthony with worried eyes. "I'll visit you always," Anthony assured, also kneeling. "Every Saturday, as we agreed. And when I'm fully recovered, you can spend some weekends with me too." The relief on the children's faces was evident. For the first time in months since their mother's passing, they felt they had firm ground under their feet. A structure, a family. Different, certainly, but still a family. At the exit of the courthouse, a small surprise awaited. Old Man January stood beside an old pickup truck, carrying a huge pot of sunflowers. "For the new house," the old foreman explained, handing the flowers to Julia. "Or rather, for the new home." The distinction did not go unnoticed. A house is made of walls and a roof, a home of love and memories. That afternoon, back at Hope Ranch, they held a small private ceremony. In the orchard, near the oldest mango trees, they planted the sunflower January had brought, along with a yellow ipe seedling, a tree Clara loved so much. "For your mother," Bernard explained to the children, "a place where we can come talk to her, remember her, feel her presence." Julia took the silver bracelet off her wrist, the first time she had done so since Clara had given it to her. "Can we bury it with the root?" she asked timidly. "Mommy always said that jewels are just metal and stone, but love is what grows and flourishes." The girl's wisdom, so similar to Clara's, deeply moved Bernard. "Are you sure, daughter?" "It's your most precious memory of her." Julia nodded, determined. "I don't need the bracelet to remember her. She's here," she said, touching her own heart. "And now she'll also be in these flowers, in this tree. A piece of heaven on earth, as she always said." With reverence, they buried the delicate jewel near the roots of the ipa tree, a promise of future beauty, a connection between past and future. Philip helped, placing earth with his small hands, concentrated as if performing the most important of missions. The following months brought a new routine to Hope Ranch. Bernard completely reorganized his professional life, delegating more responsibilities to the directors in New York City to dedicate full time to the children. He set up a modern office on the ranch, from where he managed his businesses 3 days a week, reserving the rest of the time for the family he was building. Julia and Philip were enrolled in the best school in Greenvale, where they quickly excelled, she in literature and science, he in arts and sports. On weekends, as promised, Anthony visited them, increasingly sober, increasingly emotionally present. The first big celebration at the ranch after the formalization of guardianship was Philip's birthday. Bernard organized a simple but charming party, with colorful balloons, a trampoline, and a dinosaur-shaped cake, the boy's current passion. Anthony was invited not only to participate, but to help with the preparations, creating an atmosphere of cooperation that directly benefited the children. "I never thought it would be possible," Anthony commented to Bernard, as they watched Philip playing with his school friends. "Two fathers, a different family, but one that works." "Clara united us in ways we never imagined," Bernard replied. "Perhaps that is her greatest gift to all of us." The mention of Clara always brought a moment of silent reflection, a shared reverence for the woman who, even absent, remained the heart of that unusual family. As time passed, Hope Ranch became a true home. The children left their mark on every room, Julia's books in the library, Philip's drawings on the bedroom walls, toys scattered throughout the garden. The large house, once impeccably tidy, gained the welcoming chaos that only a child's presence can bring. Bernard discovered abilities in himself he had never imagined possessing: patience to teach, Philip to ride a bicycle, creativity to invent bedtime stories, serenity to comfort Julia when she woke up in the middle of the night missing her mother. The ruthless businessman gave way increasingly to the loving and present father. One Sunday afternoon, almost a year after the children's arrival at the ranch, Bernard found Julia sitting under the yellow ipe tree, which was beginning to grow vigorously. Beside it, the sunflower field they had planted bloomed in all its golden glory, creating a spectacle of colors against the blue Vermont sky. "May I sit with you?" he asked, approaching gently. The girl nodded, closing the book she was reading. "I was talking to Mommy," she explained without embarrassment. "Telling her about the school science fair. I won first place, you know." "She must be very proud," Bernard replied, sitting beside his daughter. "Just as I am." They remained in silence for a few minutes, just watching the butterflies that danced among the sunflowers. It was Julia who finally spoke, her voice carrying the maturity that had always characterized her. "Dad, do you think Mommy forgave us?" "All of us." The question caught Bernard by surprise. He reflected carefully before answering. "I don't think your mother ever needed to forgive us, daughter. Clara had a heart bigger than any grudge. She understood human weaknesses better than anyone." Julia rested her head on her father's shoulder, a gesture of intimacy that had become more frequent over the months. "You know what I think?" the girl continued. "I think she planned all of this." "What do you mean?" "The bracelet, the stories about you sending us down that specific road. As if she knew we would find Hope Ranch, as if she wanted us to find each other." His daughter's theory touched Bernard deeply. Could it be that Clara, in her silent wisdom, had orchestrated that reunion even after her passing? "Perhaps you're right," he agreed, hugging his daughter. "Your mother was always the smartest of us all." At that moment, Philip came running across the field, holding something in his hands. "Look what I found," he shouted, approaching breathlessly. It was near the stream. In his small dirt-stained hands, a heart-shaped stone perfectly natural, as if sculpted by centuries of flowing water. "It's for you," the boy said, handing the stone to Julia and Bernard. "To keep here near Mommy's tree." The three remained there until sunset, telling stories, laughing at old memories, creating new ones. When the first stars began to dot the sky, they returned to the illuminated house, where Mrs. Martha awaited them with dinner ready, and Old Man January arranged the firewood for a small bonfire in the yard, a Sunday tradition on the ranch. Before going to bed, as had become customary, Bernard went to the children's room for the last conversation of the day. Philip was already fast asleep, hugging the plush dinosaur he had received for his birthday. Julia, as always, was still reading by the nightlight. "Time to rest, young lady," Bernard said softly. "Tomorrow's a school day." The girl marked the page and closed the book, a copy of The Little Prince that had belonged to Clara. "Dad," she called when Bernard was already at the door, "thank you for finding us." Those simple words contained a universe of meanings. It wasn't just about the physical encounter at the ranch, but about the meeting of souls, mutual recognition, the family they had built from the ashes of interrupted dreams. "No." "My daughter," Bernard replied, his voice choked. "Thank you for finding me. You brought me back to life." The next morning, upon waking, Bernard found a drawing made by Philip on his bedside table, simple stick figures representing 4 people, 2 children, 2 men, all holding hands. Above, a radiant sun with a smiling face that vaguely resembled Clara. In the bottom corner, written in the uneven handwriting of a child learning to write, "Our family." Bernard framed the drawing and placed it on the main wall of the living room, where everyone could see it. It was the perfect portrait of what they had become, a family built not by destiny or by blood, but by the daily choice to love, to forgive, to start anew. And so in the fields of Vermont, among ancient mountains and sunflowers that always turned towards the light, Hope Ranch fully lived up to its name. Clara, even absent, remained at the center of everything. like the sun around which those lives orbited, finding in her memory the strength to move forward. The sunflowers continued to bloom every spring, pieces of heaven on earth, reminding everyone that true love is never lost, it only transforms, is reborn, finds new ways to flourish, even in the most improbable terrains. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Julia, Philip, and Bernard has deeply touched your hearts. Just like the Sunflowers of Hope Ranch, there is always hope for a new beginning, even after the most difficult storms. If this narrative has stirred emotions in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to receive more stories that explore the complexity of human feelings. Leave your like as a sunflower that turns to the sun, a small gesture that illuminates our daily work. And in the comments, tell us, what was the moment that touched your heart the most on this journey? Your opinion is the golden field that inspires us to continue sowing stories until the next encounter, where new emotions await you.